All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We're so thrilled that you could make time for us this Monday evening. My name is Kim Wallace, and I am with the Office of Alumni and Parent Engagement. And we are so thrilled to have Professor Emeritus Royal Rhodes with us this evening. We will be saving some time at the end of our program for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type those into the chat, and we will get to those at the end of the program. So without further ado, I'm pleased to present Valentines, Saints and Sinners, a February full of festivals with Royal Rhodes.
Well, thank you. First, I want to thank Kim Wallace for all the work she's done in putting this program together. She's a real impresario and choreographer. We're starting a new semester at Kenyon today amidst lots of snow. And I want to thank all the students, faculty, and staff who are working together to make sure the college stays open during this time. I also want to thank alumni and friends of the college who, through their donations, have made it possible for our students, whether on campus or at home, to meet the challenges of the pandemic. And we're all hoping that we'll be able to gather in person sometime not too far off. I want to talk to you today about February, which is full of festivals. Some you may know and some you may not know. The word February comes from the Latin word. I was a classics major in college, sorry. The term is februo, and it means a purgation, a cleansing. But it also refers to fertility. And we're going to see that in lots of the readings and images we're going to be looking at and hearing together this evening. Images and readings, both secular and sacred, and how those foreground how we deal with love and relationships with each other and with nature, with the transcendent. Sometimes these are emotionally intense, and other times they're very playful. And this evening, I want to emphasize the playful, maybe err on the side of the sinners rather than the saints. February 1st also begins a new year in the Celtic calendar. My family is mostly Irish, bringing signs of hope and renewal. That's what makes this month the perfect backdrop for hope and renewal, things we all need big doses of right now. That's what makes this month the perfect backdrop for this discussion too. We'll celebrate the human spirit as we journey through the festivities of Valentine's Day, Chinese New Year's, Groundhog Day, Candlemas, Purim, and a jubilant Carnival. We'll hear how writers, both ancient and modern, and those we can consider either naughty or nice, help us see ourselves and take stock. And we'll share poetic responses to poems from St. Brigid, Shakespeare, Carol Ann Duffy, poet laureate once of England, and others, along with readings by alumni. So I hope you enjoy the presentation this evening. We're going to begin with reference to Imbolc. February 1st, Imbolc is the Celtic New Year, 6 weeks between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. The Celts believe that there should be a festival every 6 weeks because people needed to party and be together. And so February 1st is the beginning of the Celtic New Year. It's also the feast day of the Celtic goddess Brigid, or Brigid, or Brigid in Gaelic, who was the patron goddess of poetry and blacksmiths. So it's kind of appropriate that we begin with her. And maybe the combination of poetry and blacksmithing makes sense. Poets bend words and blacksmiths bend iron and metal. But we're actually going to begin with a Christian saint, Saint Brigid, named for the goddess, who was in the ancient Irish culture the second patron saint of Ireland, along with Saint Patrick. So we'll look at an image of Saint Brigid of Kildare. Kildare means the Church of the Oak. And we see her as this beautiful young Irish woman, and she's holding the so-called Cross of Brigid. This was made out of rushes. And if you put that on your house, that would protect it for the coming year. We're going to start now with a reading from the prayer of Saint Brigid, and Megan Reagan-Loomis is the reader. She's heading into her 30th year teaching English at the Rivers School and also director of new faculty development. She lives in Sudbury, Massachusetts, wife to Becky and mom to Kate, Walt, and Grant. She's a Kenyan parent as well as an alumna. And her daughter, Kate, is in the class of 21. She's a hiker, a tennis player, occasional writer. She wrote a wonderful book called Juggling Twins about giving birth and raising two twin boys who are remarkable young men now. She's also pretty much an authority on Milton. So now we'll hear her read St. Brigid's prayer.
St. Brigid's Prayer. I'd like to give a lake of beer to God. I'd love the heavenly host to be tippling there for all eternity. I'd love the men of heaven to live with me, to dance and sing. If they wanted, I'd put at their disposal vats of suffering. White cups of love I'd give them, with a heart and a half. Sweet pitchers of mercy I'd offer to every man. I'd make heaven a cheerful spot because the happy heart is true. I'd make the men contented for their own sake. I'd like Jesus to love me too. I'd like the people of heaven to gather from all the parishes around. I'd give a special welcome to the women, the three Marys of great renown. I'd sit with the men, the women, and God there by the lake of beer. We'd be drinking good health forever, and every drop would be a prayer.
Thank you. I'm going to read a poetic response to Brigid's prayer. That's going to be kind of an element of the format this evening. You'll hear someone read, or we'll look at some images, and then I'll have to give my 2 cents worth by reading a poem I've written or telling you about some of the images we'll look at. This is called After St. Brigid's Prayer. After an eternity of tippling begun by the Irish saints and monastic brewmasters. Megan asked me if I was going to read this in a Lucky Charms voice. I'll try not to. And monastic brewmasters from all the wide world, the dark forces of hell, saw their chance to seize heaven. Leading the holy host, blind with the drink, the old trickster conducted a conga line of loyal angels and saints, named and unnamed, out of the golden gates and deep into the fiery halls and hollows of hell. And the legions of devils with bat wings and brimstone breath occupied the heavenly city and sat at the banquet tables, still bearing white cups of love, along with sweet pitchers of mercy. And there was quiet in heaven for the space of half an hour. And then a ruckus arose out of the depths of the other place, a noise that set Satan clamping his webbed hands firmly over his pointed ears, as did the rest of the fallen, unused to such pandemonium. So they tumbled down to see. Instead of the wailing expected and the hopeless gnashing of teeth, a fiddle or two or three and the handheld beat of a drum fill the air, not acrid or sulphurous, but sweet as a child's first breath. There was singing, such grand hallelujahs, such chorus on chorus of song from the damned, now mixed with the people of heaven from all the parishes gathered, and welcoming men and the women, and the three Marys trilling their voices, and the angels, seraphs, and thrones, shaking and showing perfect bottoms and gold wings, were drinking good health in round after round, and then pissing over the heads of the imps Satan had coaxed down to look. And the place resembled a wedding with the whole human race now forgiven. What once was a hellfire prison had become the copy of heaven, as the saints, and Jesus among them, poured out mercy, cup after cup, and every drop was a prayer. Our festivals usually, as I said, draw on sacred vocabulary. The language of love is borrowed often from religious sources, the mystics and others. The human and the divine, the corporal or spiritual, convert our wordless emotions into terms we can exchange. They're often transgressive, as I said, sometimes bordering more in line with how the sinners talk and behave than with what we primly look for with the saints. Those scientists amongst you who are interested in how the human brain reacts to or accepts romantic love, I'd suggest a website by two of my old friends, Lucy Brown, who's a neuroscientist at Einstein Medical College in New York, and Helen Fisher, a cultural anthropologist at Rutgers. And their website is called The Anatomy of Love, all one word, theanatomyoflove.com. And it shows the basis for examining the physical and social aspects of love in our brains and our bodies. So before we get too much carried off by poetry, we can also introduce science into this. After all, that's what the humanities are for, right? But perhaps most of us are more familiar with the term St. Valentine's Day. And if we could look at the image of St. Valentine that is often
St.
popular.
Brigid's.
So here is a stained glass window showing the old martyr Saint Valentine blessing the love and union between a young man and a young woman. Because the legend was that he went into the prisons and brought lovers together and left messages behind that said, "Your Valentine." That's all hokum. All we know about Valentine is that he was an early Christian martyr. And all the business about bringing lovers together and St. Valentine's Day being the celebration, the festivity of that love was a much later creation. You can look at the next image. And here is an illustration from a work by the man who invented the myth of St. Valentine's Day as a joining of lovers. And that was Geoffrey Chaucer in his book, The Parliament of Fowls, in which he had written for King Richard II of England and Anne of Bohemia for their engagement, a discourse about how human love mimics and follows the love found in nature. And he believed that birds began mating at this time, around February 14th or 15th, and that they mated once for life. Unfortunately, he wasn't up on his Darwin, but that idea stuck. And we still use some of that vocabulary, aligning human love with love found amongst animals. Someone is called lovey-dovey, or I'll tell you about the birds and the bees. We can thank Chaucer for that linkage of language. The next slide, please. Valentine's Day gets its real impetus in the 19th century. You could say probably also in the 20th century with Hallmark cards. But the whole cult of exchanging Valentine's cards of gifts like chocolate and flowers and jewelry went well with the consumer society of the 19th century. And the images were often of this kind of saccharine, sweet, affectionate greeting. And we see the little cherubs with their little wings putting their love notes into the mailbox with a heart on it. I'm going to read a poem I wrote, perhaps a little too cynically, called Another Anti-Valentine. Another feast arrives to honor Cupid with fleshly sport, a friendly grunt or tickle, a pledge of love, or something just as stupid. On this day, we toast the false and fickle. Catullus, Ovid, Aristophanes, Juvenal, and Martial's epigrams laughed about the fabled birds and bees, bulls and cows, the bleating ewes and rams. We mortals mimic. The poetess will blow her poet kisses, jockettes ride their jocks, but carnal knowledge we must surely know. We'll break our fragile dinghy on the rocks. Pray that Eros simply lets us be. Let others play the fool on real TV. We're still stuck with those images, though, of Valentine's Day and images of romantic love from the poets and playwrights. So if we look at the next image, we'll see a familiar image, perhaps to some, the remake in modern times of the film Romeo and Juliet. The earlier one by Zeffirelli is the classic. But you can recognize the young actors clenching here. We're going to have a reading of a sonnet by Shakespeare, sonnet number 116, that is going to be done by the Reverend Mary Carson. She's a 1986 alumna. She was a synoptic major in music and religion. I remember her fabulous senior recital and capstone event in the chapel. She's been an Episcopal priest for 28 years. She says she can't believe it's been that long. Neither can I. And she served in a variety of positions and currently is rector of St. James Episcopal Church on the west side of Cincinnati. And I think it's appropriate that she read this sonnet to us by Shakespeare.
Sonnet 116 by William Shakespeare. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved.
Thank you, Mary. That sonnet is so often read at weddings, and it's perhaps familiar to you. Again, I'm going to respond with a kind of anti-Shakespeare sonnet. So this is called Carpe Verbum, or Seize the Word. Shakespeare, love, could not have been more wrong to claim that nothing shall outlive this rhyme. The craft that set the metric line and song will age, and helpless in this grip of time, death to birth, to death again will spin. Love me, and I will make you live forever, artists boast, but weariness within will grow, and words will seem so merely clever. Scissors, rock, and paper, games of fate, are all we have. And even as we play at being young, the time of day grows late, for lives in verse, where glory does not stay. But split apart, then join, the words we craved, like us, at last, are broken, buried, saved. The last word is the hopeful point in the poem, I hope. But now we're going to go to some examples of modern love. So we'll have the next image. Some of you may have seen this before. I love it. Life is like an onion. You peel it off one layer at a time, and sometimes you weep. I've asked another alum to read a poem by Carol Ann Duffy, a Valentine poem called Not a Red Rose. Reuben Miller, the class of 06, is going to read this. When I asked him for something to use to introduce him, he said, you can say that he was thankful that he had Rhodes as an advisor. And he was lucky to have had Rhodes as an advisor, but unlucky never to have taken a class from Rhodes. I think he mixed them up. I think he really wanted to say he was unlucky enough to have Rhodes as an advisor, but lucky enough to evade the class. Reuben is a wonderful poet in his own right. If he shared some of his light comedic verse with you, you know it makes your heart shake like a bowl full of jelly. So now we'll hear Reuben Miller read from Carol Ann Duffy.
Not a rose or a satin heart. I give you an onion. It's a moon wrapped in brown paper. It promises light, like the careful undressing of love. Here, it will blind you with tears, like a lover. It will make your reflection a wobbling photo of grief. I am trying to be truthful, not a cute card or a kissogram. I give you an onion. Its fierce kiss will stay on your lips, possessive and faithful, as we are, for as long as we are. Take it. Its platinum loops shrink to a wedding ring, if you like. Lethal. Its scent will cling to your fingers, cling to your knife.
Thank you, Reuben. And this is my response to Carol Ann Duffy. You said you would not send some bloody Tudor rose or box of sugary confections tied up with satin ribbons. Instead, a multi-layered onion that requires deft unwrapping, recalling acts of love's undressing. But I followed all the hints the cooking channel offers to prevent those blinding tears you liken to a lover's failure. Instead, I pray to have just once that holy gift of tears, the sober saint's request from God without withholding love. The onion's kiss, you say, will linger from one taste, but each of us has known a fiercer burn from kisses, more possessive and less faithful than some Vidalia sweetness. Layer peeled away from layer, flaying some still living thing, becomes a ring shrunk down to slip upon some worshipped digit. Something lethal, you describe it, whose scent clings to a cutting board and the cold inserted knife. But also roses not attended, and chocolate so bittersweet have ways to work that same effect. Here's the lovely onion back, left unopened, Valentine. Now we'll go to the next image that celebrates Groundhog Day. Many of you will recognize Bill Murray from that film, in which he plays a weatherman who gets stuck in a quantum loop of persistent repetitions, existential repetitions. Maybe something like how we felt during the pandemic. One mathematician calculated that the character was stuck in that loop for 33 and more years as he tried to understand that he had the will, if he wanted to use it, to become good. And that was the only way to redemption. Groundhog Day, February 2nd, is also in an earlier religious context called Candlemas Day. It's the old Christian feast of the purification of the Virgin Mary, 40 days after giving birth to Jesus, and the presentation of the baby boy Jesus to the temple as an offering to God. Candles were blessed on that day, and that's why it's called Candlemas. Later, people have associated it with the Roman feast and festival of Lupercalia, that strange ritual of purgation and fertility, where young men in Rome and elsewhere stripped themselves naked and then took strips of skin from goats soaked in blood and ran around slapping people, especially young women, with the bloody thongs. But we know that the Christian feasts of purification and presentation were celebrated long before the Christian community moved from its home base in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land to Rome. But in the film Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, he gives us a kind of variation on looking back and examining one's life. The older medieval poem about Candlemas was this: if Candlemas be fair and bright, come, winter, have another flight. If Candlemas brings clouds and rain, go, winter, and come not again. So the tradition of whether the groundhog sees its shadow and thus 6 more weeks of winter, or if it doesn't see its shadow. But even the groundhog changed. In Germany, in older times, it wasn't a groundhog, it was a hedgehog. And when German immigrants came to the United States, they didn't find many hedgehogs, so they just transferred the power to a groundhog. And Murray's character in the film recites this line from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, Work Without Hope. All nature seems at work. Slugs leave their lair. The bees are stirring. Birds are on the wing. And winter slumbering in the open air, wears on his smiling face a dream of spring, and I the while the sole unbusy thing, nor honey make, nor pair, nor build, nor sing, voicing a kind of desperation of the character. Can we have the next slide, please? Some of you may be more familiar with Groundhog Day in terms of Punxsutawney Phil, who is dragged out to predict whether or not there will be more winter or whether spring will be early. The claim is that this is the original Punxsutawney Phil, dating from the 1880s. So be gentle with him because he's very, very old. But some of you may not know that there is an Ohio version of Punxsutawney Phil called Buckeye Chuck. And you should follow Buckeye Chuck more closely. Be true to your own locale, I guess. The statistics for correct prognostication by Punxsutawney Phil is that he's been accurate 39% of the time. That's pretty large. That's wonderful. But Buckeye Chuck has been correct 75% of the time. So you may have to slip your allegiances to the local brand of woodchuck groundhog. Okay, can we have the next slide? This is a scene from Purim, which is also celebrated in February. This year, February 25th to 26th. Purim is a story about Queen Esther that's venerated by Jews and Christians and Muslims. It's a kind of combination of Halloween and Carnival because it tells the story of how Queen Esther took a dangerous step that threatened her own life in order to save her people. So once more, we see the celebration of the renewal of life and the protection of life in Purim. And special foods are eaten, as with so many of the other festivals. February 12th is also the Chinese New Year, the New Year of the metal ox. And people who were born in this variety of the Chinese zodiac New Year are considered to be very determined and honest and devoted to family and society. You may know some of those people who were born in the year of the metal ox. There are earth oxes, wind, fire, also, and wood. But the metal ox, as I said, are very determined people. Someone named Barack Obama was born in the year of the metal ox, as was Walt Disney, as was Princess Diana, as was Clooney, the actor. So looking at those connections about who you look to for sources of renewal and hope, ask when they were born. The next image we have is perhaps familiar to some of you. This is by Peter Bruegel the Elder. It was a painting made in 1559, and it shows the battle between Carnival, farewell to the flesh, and Lent, the 40 days of austerity and fasting before the Christian celebration of Easter. In Rio de Janeiro, the celebration of Carnival stretches from February 12th to the 17th. In Venice, from January 30th to February 16th, and in New Orleans from January 6th to February 16th, with Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, the culmination of Carnival, all sadly constricted by the pandemic. But on the left, you can see Lord Carnival sitting on a beer barrel with a big pork chop in the front. And on a skewer, like a lance, he has a pig's head and other meat. And on his head, he's balancing a meat pie and having a grand old time for it. And below him are cards and old bones that have been eaten and broken eggs. So all showing the excess of those who are celebrating the last kinds of fun before the austerities of Lent. He also has knives at his belt because he's probably a butcher, and this is one of the activities that showed what butchers were doing to celebrate Carnival. On the other side is Lent, austerity, piety, all kinds of self-abnegation. And here, dressed like a nun, is Lent, wearing a beehive on her head, which is a metaphor for the church. And she has a long paddle with a couple of herring or sardines on it. And her float is being pulled by a nun and a monk. The image of the sardines was popular as a metaphor for Lent. And some of you may know the famous painting by Goya that shows the funeral of the sardine at the end of Lent, where people didn't have to eat fish anymore, but could have all those other good meats that Lord Carnival had offered them before. I'm going to end with a couple of things. One is to go back to Valentines for a moment and read you the poem by the wonderful poet Jack Prelutsky called My Mother's Chocolate Valentine. See if any of you can identify with what he's saying in this Valentine to his mother. I bought a box of chocolate hearts, a present for my mother. They looked so good. I tasted one, and then I tried another. They both were so delicious that I ate another 4, and then another couple, and then half a dozen more. I couldn't seem to stop myself. I nibbled on and on. Before I knew what happened, all the chocolate hearts were gone. I felt a little guilty. I was stuffed down to my socks. I ate my mother's Valentine. I hope she likes the box. And the last thing is, this couldn't be a Kenyan talk without a homework assignment. So this is your homework assignment. And what you're going to do in the days and weeks ahead, compose a 6-word memoir. Some of you may have read or heard about that movement from the book, Not Quite What I Was Planning. I think that fits into our own experience with the pandemic. Not quite what we were planning. But in 6 words, write down what you think the isolation, the quarantine, the separation from people, places, and things you love has meant to you in just 6 words. What are the ways that you have found to find joy in just 6 words? What are the ways in which you have reached out to other people to show that we are all connected through Zoom meetings, telephone calls, letters, or the friendly wave as you drive past people. So 6 words in your memoir. And what you can do after you finish them is swap them with some of your friends, your loved ones, and see what they've come up with as well. That's your homework assignment. So look busy. Thank you.
And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box. And thank you so much, Royal, for sharing all of those wonderful poems with us. And thank you to the alumni who lended their voices to those wonderful renditions.
They were wonderful. Appreciate them. This reminds me of the story. I sat in on a colleague's class one time who gave a brilliant lecture on a very erudite topic. And as we were coming out, there were 2 students ahead of me, and they turned to each other and said, did you hear that? And the other one said, yes, yes. That was the most profound lecture I've ever heard. And the other one said, yes, me too. I didn't understand a word of it. So I hope some of the poems came through enough for you to take to heart.
Well, we've actually had the same question come through a number of times. So the people want to know, what is your 6-word memoir that you would share?
I am not yet ready now. How many words is that? I'll leave it ready for what at this point.
Thank you. Someone else asked if you had any comment on the inaugural poem as a love letter.
Oh, it spoke to my heart. And some of you may know that Amanda has written, very moving poetry even before that. Members of the Catholic Church in LA, in which she is a parishioner, have benefited from her poetry for years. And so I think not only is there a question of love, but that touches on bringing together the transcendent and the everyday, how we relate to each other, to nature and to the world. I was just so moved by it, and I know we depend on poets to really put us in touch with not only each other, but with the better angels of our nature.
Thank you. Someone else asked who your favorite contemporary practitioners of the love poem might be.
I love a number of people. Actually, I love Carol Ann Duffy. She has a book called Rapture, which is just love poems. I think she's a little too rapturous about love, but she's really wonderful. And I don't think you have to be explicit about talking about love or affection, but that can be conveyed in how you look at the world, especially nature. And for me, of course, Mary Oliver is the poet I go back to so often. I had a special project one summer to go to Cape Cod, where she wrote so many of her poems, and visit the exact place where she talks about in the poems. Location, location, location. And so I got there and was unpacking, and I found that I hadn't brought any of her books with me. So I went into a little bookshop, and there were only 2 volumes, volume 1, volume 2 of collected poems. So I just grabbed them off the shelf, and the bookseller said, "Those are the only ones we have." And I thanked him, and I went back to my room and opened them up, and they had each been inscribed by Mary Oliver. So I said it was fate. I spent too much time just languidly reading her poems on the beach rather than hunting down every location the way I was supposed to. But that's the nature of research, isn't it? You can find new things everywhere.
Well, we have a related question to that, which is, what is the last good book you read, poetry or otherwise?
The last one I read that I really, I've been reading mostly poetry because I find it, if I read something academic or nonfiction, I end up making marginal notes, and that's not good. And if I read a novel or even short story connections, I usually fall asleep and then forget what I've read. And so if I read poetry books, and I recommend to everyone, the last thing before you go to sleep at night and the first thing when you get up in the morning is read a poem or two. And believe me, it sets the day. I have to say I've been going back to some poems that I haven't read in a long time, but poems by Kenyan authors, people like Robert Lowell, and all his troubled life. I was lucky enough through friends to be able to sit in on his poetry class at Harvard, and just the way he tortured out every poem that he read, and was so totally involved in it. And that's what I think poetry can do. It just strikes you at your very being. Ellen Tate, short story writer like Peter Taylor, who I also got to know. Just amazing people that Kenyan has turned out. One Kenyan poet I think that is underestimated, Anthony Hecht, whose poetry is just beautiful. The great story about him, some of you may know, is that when he was an undergrad at Kenyon, he submitted some of his poetry to Mr. Ransom, John Crow Ransom, for publication in the Kenyon Review. And he went in to talk to Mr. Ransom at some point about a paper he had written or a question he had. And it was the custom for Ransom to write on the blackboard. Some of you will remember what blackboards look like. Behind him, the names of the poets that he was going to publish in the next issue of the Kenyon Review. And Hecht glanced up and saw the last name on the list was Hecht. And he was so thrilled. He didn't say anything, but at the end of the conversation, he said, "Mr. Ransom, I can't tell you how thrilled I am that you've chosen one of my poems to put into the Kenyon Review." And Ransom looked up and said, "What?" And Hecht pointed to the blackboard. at his name. And Ransom looked around and said, "Oh," and he erased it and wrote Brecht. Bertolt Brecht instead. But later Hecht did get poems in the review. He's someone who should receive, even though he's deceased, an honorary degree from Kenyon. He's a great, great American poet.
Thank you. Someone else asked, and I apologize if I butcher the pronunciation of this gentleman's name. Someone asked if you're a fan of the poet Padraig Ó Tuama.
I've heard of his work. I think I actually have a couple of volumes in one of the ever ascending piles of books in my home. You know, we've all heard about those stories of elderly people in apartments in New York City who are found, have passed away because great heaps of newspapers and books have fallen on them. I think that that's how I'm going to go. You can barely move in the labyrinth of my house. But why did this person like Padraig's poetry? Padraig is from the west of Ireland. Tuam is the big center, so he took his name from the location where he wrote poetry. But the Irish are so amazing because they've had to navigate a couple of languages at least in their literary works.
Several folks have mentioned in the chat that he has a podcast that they highly recommend. So for those who enjoy podcasts, that might be worth checking out. It looks like it might be called Poetry Unbound.
Excellent, excellent. And I think those resources are so good for people to be in touch with lots of poets they may not have heard of. You know, spread the net a little further to things. I've also been going back to some of the classical poets and doing some translations of Catullus, who I think is, for me, one of the great poets. I have a young cousin in Atlanta who was a classics major at the University of Georgia. And when I asked her what her favorite poet was, she said Catullus. And I said, Ode et amo. And she looked, and her father looked at me, and then she pulled her shirt down, and in the back of her neck was tattooed Ode et amo. That's real dedication to a poet.
Now, this question might be a good one to end on, or it might be leaving too much unsaid, but someone asked, who is your favorite poet of all time?
Who is my favorite poet of all time? It has to be Dante. The Divine Comedy, the comedy later called Divine, is just the most magnificent poem. I think bringing together philosophy, religion, astronomy, botany, politics, everything else. I saw a news story that one of his descendants is trying to get the criminal charge that was placed against Dante during his lifetime lifted by the Italian government. But for me, especially hearing Dante read in Italian is a mesmerizing experience. Virgil's kind of second, and then that guy Shakespeare. But I love. I saw Adele Davidson is with us, and her expertise in George Herbert, who is without equal. There's just too many. It's like asking, who's your favorite child? Yeah. Of course, all families want to know that, right?
Well, thank you so much for such a wonderful evening. We really appreciate it. And for those of you who have other friends who are hoping to catch this program, we have recorded it and we'll be posting it on our website, as well as emailing it out to everyone who registered for this evening. So those who missed it will have the opportunity to catch up. And again, thank you so much to all of you, and stay warm and stay safe. Have a great evening.
If you have any questions, you can always email me, rhodesr@kenyon.edu. And thank you from my heart for being here. Thanks.